unexpected revelation.
Hey everyone, welcome to the live stream. It is Wednesday, June 3rd. Over 28 headlines for you in the next hour or so. We usually go about hour, 10 minutes. An hour and 10 minutes, excuse me. Little late today. Sorry, I was trying to rush to get the live stream up. So welcome to the podcast. So top of the news today, our top stories, California supermajority fails to lock out Republicans in the primaries. If you didn't know, like in other third world countries, some states have gone to ranked choice voting, which is like everybody wins sort of thing, or the top two contenders win, regardless of what party they're from. Excuse me, I'm already having a couple difficulties there. So, which is weird. So, like in California, they failed to lock out Republicans. They tried to block Republicans, and there is some fraud that is questionable that's going on there. I'm going to get into that a little bit. Also, the Iran wars fell into an uneasy pattern of tit-for-tat. It can't last forever. It shouldn't last forever because there are things that are going to happen if the Straits of Hormuz remain closed. We have many headlines to get through today, under 30. Don't forget to engage the channel, like, subscribe, leave a comment, and share the podcast. So without further ado, let's read the news. We're going to start out with One American News. Trump calls fake news reports over U.S. and Iran ending talks false and erroneous. The New York Times has the headline updated at 4:42 Tehran time. What the hell is the New York Times doing? Who cares, Iran time? What about, okay, updated 4 minutes ago, Iran war live updates. Kuwait says 1 killed and dozens injured in Iranian attack on airport. It's a civilian airport. It's an international airport. The United States and Iran accused each other of launching new strikes. President Trump told the New York Post that Iran's supreme leader is involved in peace talks and he hopes to meet him. So Trump is going to meet with the gay Ayatollah. I don't know about that. This is a crazy New York Times story, and I want to just point out that here's what the New York Times posts in their story. Here's where U.S. troops are stationed in the Gulf. Here you go, Iran. Here's where all the U.S. troops are, where you could target. And it shows there in red long-term U.S. military bases, and in gray other military sites with recent U.S. military presence. Now, does that include the Kuwaiti International Airport? I don't know. That's a civilian airport where its main terminal was struck. We're going to get to that in just a second. But the New York Post story number 3, U.S. carries out self-defense strikes against Iranian drones and missiles as Tehran targets Kuwait and Bahrain. Tehran launched at least 5 missiles that failed to hit their intended targets in neighboring Gulf countries. 2 fell short or splintered mid-air, while the other 3 were intercepted by U.S. and Bahrain air defense forces, according to CENTCOM. CENTCOM also said that they shot down 3 one-way attack drones that Iranian forces fired towards civilian mariners in the surrounding regional waters, so Gulf shipping, more than likely oil tankers. The U.S. strikes targeted a military ground control station on an island which sits along the critical Strait of Hormuz. Goes on to say the U.S. military condemned the unwarranted Iranian aggression during the ongoing ceasefire. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, meanwhile, painted its attacks on Kuwait as a response to U.S. forces' brazen and blatant aggression. in strikes on Keshem Island. It warned that Tuesday's strikes were merely an initial response. Initial response. Why are there going to be more responses? The problem is the Americans look at any preparation for an attack as an impending attack. So obviously I'm biased being an American, but this is what they do. They have the eyes everywhere, satellites, reconnaissance drones watching every military site. So as soon as they start rolling out missile launchers or attack drones, so their attack drones are big and they have to be launched using a launcher. It's different than the American drones, which basically, depending on the drone, but most of the American drones are launched from an airport or aircraft runway. So as soon as the Iranians start prepping missiles, rockets, drones, the Americans come in and strike. Because if you're not planning to launch these missiles, drones, or rockets, they wouldn't be brought out in the first place. So, you know, what are they're not bringing them out into the daylight to polish them up or whatever. They're going to launch them, and that's the reason for the strikes. Besides, the Iranians are in no position to fight off militarily the Americans. Just the News reports on this, saying CENTCOM says U.S. forces have defended against a new aggressive behavior by Iran. The U.S. military and Iran launched several ballistic missiles toward regional neighbors in the Middle East, which all failed to hit their targets of Bahrain and Kuwait. American forces also shot down 3 one-way attack drones, as I reported earlier. They were launched toward civilian mariners. That's almost verbatim of the other story. The Zero Hedge has a different headline. Zero Hedge, in article number 5, major Iranian attack on Kuwait International Airport leaves 1 dead, 63 injured. Now, this is an international civilian airport. Kuwait International Airport has come under Iranian missile and drone attack on Wednesday in a significant strike that killed 1 person and left 63 people injured. Passenger terminal was directly struck, damaging facilities, including diplomatic mission at the airport. So maybe that was the target? Probably. Kuwaiti authorities have said. Now, this diplomatic mission might be a CIA base. That was likely the target. And don't forget who's targeting, who's helping with the targeting for the Iranian strikes, besides the New York Times, is Chinese and Russian satellites. An area hospital conducted 7 major emergency surgeries following the incident. Excuse me. I just finished breakfast, so I'm a little not quite up to speed, and I haven't finished my coffee, so, but I am feeling alert and cogent. So let's move on. Story number 6. PJ Media, and in this article by David Manny, Iran's war math still doesn't add up. What is he talking about? They're fighting a losing battle, and we're not even getting into the fact that the blockade is working. So Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has tried to wrap Tehran's demands in diplomatic language, but missiles aimed at Gulf neighbors speak more clearly than a prepared statement. Iran says they stopped communicating with mediators about extending a ceasefire, and nobody's really interested in that anyway. Right? I'm not interested in that. I just assume we keep bombing them. That's the point, is the blockade, the naval blockade plus military strikes would be devastating. But as I said before, diplomatically, politically, Trump is looking for an off-ramp, obviously. I think maybe he believes now, or has some sense now after the recent dust up with Netanyahu about Lebanon strikes, that he was led into this war under false pretense, saying, oh, it would be an easy thing. And I don't want to digress into the fact that Israel, the leftists in Israel, wanted to bait Netanyahu into a war so they could label him as a war criminal, because they knew Netanyahu and the Lichud's military plan would be, if Hamas struck, and Hamas is ultimately controlled by Israel anyway, in this October 7th attack, it would unleash what the Likud had on the shelf, which is utter decimation of Islamic groups threatening Israel, which includes Hezbollah, Hamas, and Iran. But the problem is they can't take on Iran alone just because of the size difference. So they needed America as a hedge against Iran, and that was part of the plan. And Trump bit. Rightfully, wrongfully, I mean, we could sit here and discuss that all day. Going back to the PJ Media article here, any regime that pauses diplomacy to launch weapons tells the world which tools it trusts the most. Iran's leaders seem trapped in the same old loop. They provoke, threaten, launch, miss, deny, and then announce some grand moral victory to whoever still has the patience to listen. The missiles and drones fail. The bases remain U.S. bases. The regime still expects applause from its propaganda machine somewhere in Tehran. Somebody probably stamped the operation a success because the printer still had ink. Behind the noise sits a colder reality. Iran's economy keeps bleeding. Its people keep paying for the ambition of the clerics and the commanders who confuse defiance with competence. Couldn't have said it better myself. Now, we still have the naysayers in parts of the right and in MAGA or not MAGA, formerly MAGA. I'm still a patriot. I root for the camp in which I sit. And I'm not tribal, but I live in America. So since I live in America, even if I was just a resident, but I am a citizen of America, I want America to win. Regardless how we got in this position, we have to be triumphant. All right, let's move on to the next story, which I should have led with, but I like to lead with Iran because everything hinges on that conflict. Like I said, I don't want to say the timing, the length of this conflict is not open-ended. Right? Like Afghanistan. This can't go on for 20 years. Can't really go on much longer without severe global economic pain. I mean, a lot of Asian countries are already feeling it. So, but let's move on to the elections. The Guardian, California primary election results, governor's race too close to call. Early results show Steve Hilton, Republican, Javier Becerra, Democrat, and Tom Steyer, Democrats, emerging in the front with many ballots still to be counted. What I said earlier, and some have alluded to, including Scott Baio when he was on Fox, was the Democratic machine, who has a lock on politics in California, will never let a Republican take major office. They'll set off an atomic bomb before they allow that to happen. So they will undermine the vote, the election in any way possible. They have a great fraud operation going on in California, whether they're lighting ballot boxes on fire or just forgetting to count ballots, disappearing ballots, magic appearing ballots, so on and so forth. It keeps happening. Fox News is reporting story number 8, Hilton Becerra in the lead with votes still being counted in battle for California governor. Change is coming. Surge by Trump-backed Hilton lifts Republican gubernatorial candidate towards November showdown in California. So Tom Steyer, is he out? Like I said, California's weird with this ranked choice voting. Like they don't have separate primaries. They have an initial ballot, which like a lot of third world countries do. You have initial ballot, and then the top two then run against each other. And so this type of election is fraught with abilities to commit fraud. And that's why California instituted it. First of all, you can pack the election with lesser candidates to siphon votes away from people. That's the thing. That's what they do in Europe all the time, where they have this sort of shit. Um, you put in 6 Democrat candidates and they siphon votes away from everybody, but they have to be careful not to siphon votes from their preferred Democrat candidate. But they could also back other Republican challengers, et cetera, et cetera. And that's the problem they have found. It's fraught with. They have people like Tom Steyer or ramen noodles there for the LA race, where they're actually siphoning from their own candidacy, but they also use it to undermine ballot counts and ballot distribution and all sorts of different things. I'm not going to get too buried in the details here, but if you want to look more into it, you should investigate it. Maybe I'll have a special segment on the different ways elections can be done. I prefer the party have primaries and then those 2 parties field candidates, because in all reality, the parties can choose their candidates. The law says that they don't have to listen to the electorate. In any case, Fox News again, story number 9, Karen Bass to face runoff election amid tough challenge from Spencer Platt. So Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass is advancing to runoff election after failing to capture 51% of the vote needed to win outright in a bid for re-election, as has drawn national attention. That has drawn national attention. A second candidate who will advance to the runoff has yet to be called. So again, this is the point of having ramen noodles in there, is to siphon votes away from Pratt, or to seemingly do so, because in all reality, Spencer Pratt probably wouldn't have won 51% of the vote to win. But ramen noodles is more than likely siphoning votes from Pratt and not necessarily Karen Bass. However, that could be debated. Realistically, the fact that he's not, or the race hasn't been called, is suspect. It's the same thing with the gubernatorial thing. If 24 hours past, we will be at 24 hours come 8 o'clock Pacific time from the polls closing, you have to have the count. And the problem is Spencer Pratt, although he's an upstart and has been endorsed by Trump, he doesn't have the election machine to go in and monitor the count, which he should be doing, because watch, surprise, 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 that he'll lose and he won't be able to compete with Karen Bass in the election in November. Don't be surprised if that happens. With all this talk about Spencer Pratt, and I think a lot of Democrats, the Democratic Party was also pushing for Trump-backed candidates in the primaries so they could defeat them, mostly through fraud, in the general election and go, look, Trump lost, haha. It's all rigged. Trump was correct when he said that early on in 2015 during the debate. CNN has the take, Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass punched her ticket for November's election. Spencer Pratt is hoping for his. Realistically, overwhelmingly Democratic city, Pratt, a former reality television star and registered Republican, would be clear underdog against Bass, a former state lawmaker, congresswoman with support of the city's labor unions. I was part of a labor union, and they were anti-democratic and seemingly supported candidates that were against the union's best interest. Like my labor union supported Hillary Clinton, who was looking to push through the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which would gut manufacturing jobs. Why would labor unions do that? Because they're controlled opposition. Socialism is controlled opposition, if you didn't know. It's the merchant class, the industrialist invented their sons invented communism, socialism, um, as a controlled opposition to their reign as new kings, because they were doing away with monarchism, which tried to hold the merchant class, the new industrial aristocracy, in check. Um, and they took what was formidably the French left after the French Revolution, which was trying to control the money spent. Uh, the money is supposed to be spent on people. So, although that might have been legitimate leftism from the left bank, and that's where you really get the phrase "the left from," left bank of the Seine, that it was hijacked by the sons of industrialists who claimed that they were working for the working class and not the industrialists, even though their parents, like in the case of uh, not Marx, Frederick Engels, whose father was an industrialist, and he inherited his father's industrial empire afterwards. So, they weren't commoners, so to speak. Fox News story number 11, Trump endorsed Fenstra concedes to Maha-backed Lan and GOP governor primary upset. Maha-backed outsider topples Trump endorsed congressman in crowded race for Iowa governor. And as you see again, a crowded race. So when you have a crowded race, there are votes that are purposely siphoned off of people that would easily win. Lan now will face Democrat State Auditor Rob Sand in November. Sand, Iowa's only Democrat statewide office holder, advanced unopposed through the Democratic primary and has built a political profile centered on government accountability and anti-corruption efforts. Now look at this guy's face. Doesn't he remind you of Tallarico a little bit? Anyway, moving on. Story number 12. TJ Media, Pelosi's name wasn't on California ballot for the first time in 40 years, and there is rejoicing in the land. Although she has a handpicked successor, some Asian woman, who again is pushing socialism. Which ties into this next story from the post-millennial. Breaking: Muslim socialist with ties to Al-Qaeda terrorist wins Democratic House primary in New Jersey. Again, a typo. Hamaway defended Al-Qaeda terrorist, the blind sheik, during the 1995 trial for plotting terror attacks in New York City, which again was a false flag of sorts. So I don't want to get into the project for a new American century and all this stuff and how they controlled and how the Brits controlled the Saudi Arabians for some time as a force, and that they were used as a new boogeyman after the fall of the Soviet Union, which actually was propped up by the West. And, it goes on, and that's where you get the Red-Green Alliance. And it's creating an enemy out of nothing, the paupers that would be easily defeated by the merchant class, because the merchant class has to have, now the corporate class, I'm calling it the merchant class, has to have an enemy to point at, or else you won't be able to forward their agenda. And that doesn't mean I'm not for capitalism. I'm just not for corporatism. Corporations are the Frankenstein monster of today. They're not persons. They don't deserve to be treated like persons with individual rights, because they don't have souls. And so that goes back to the metaphysical, what you believe is spirit aspects of life is, spiritual aspects of life, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I don't want to get into that. Article number 14 from the Federalist. What Graham Plattner did at his brother's wedding revealed his repulsive character 10 years ago. What are they talking about? Well, this is the origination or the exposure of his Nazi tattoo. A Nazi-themed tattoo he was sporting on his chest at the wedding, which he has since had covered up with a more unsightly ink. By the way of explaining how he got the original marking, he, for some reason, thought it was necessary to also publicize a family video from his brother's wedding in 2015, wherein a chunky Plattner is seen at a reception dancing almost naked, seemingly drunk, and lip syncing along with to Miley Cyrus's Wrecking Ball. Quoting Plattner, the video is from my brother's marriage to his wife, my sister-in-law, who I was serenading. I told them that my wedding gift to them would be my embarrassment, and so I performed a lip-sync version of Miley Cyrus' Wrecking Ball to my sister-in-law on that day and to my brother. The article goes on to say, you read it correctly, his wedding gift to his brother and sister-in-law, Plattner, who was in his early 30s at the time, stripped down to a bare pair of skimpy running shorts to do an obnoxious Jack Black style miming of Miley Cyrus's song on the day of the wedding. Imagine the level of narcissism it takes to not only tell your family that the gift you're giving them on one of the most important days of their lives is not only yourself, but that it's yourself drunkenly dancing near nude in front of all their friends and loved ones, a captive audience. You'll notice that the woman who appears to be Plattner's sister-in-law doesn't seem particularly amused by the performance. At one point, she does not even pay attention, and only when Plattner gets right in her face, his puffed out gut sagging over his waistband, does she give a polite smile. It's okay to be obnoxious. I think it's rude not to give your brother and sister-in-law an actual gift, a monetary gift, but to instead dance around like a drunken asshole. I think they're right in this story denoting this guy's character. Goes on to say, it was obscene, self-centered thing to do. And all the other little controversies surrounding Plattner, the shocking tattoo, his history of crass online forum remarks, his sexual affairs with other women reinforce the probability he's simply an immature, gross person. I would go even further than that. I have a real issue with arrested adolescents, even if it's mostly masked, that it comes out only sometimes. Of course, it's immature. We teach our young people to grow up and not surrender their stupid, childish interests, whether it's collecting toys or, Comic-Con or doing whatever. At a certain point, you're going to have to mature because life is serious and someone has to take on serious decision-making and issues. In any case, goes on to say, that's not to say it disqualifies him from office. After all, Rosa DeLauro sits in Congress. Now, Rosa DeLauro is my congressperson in Connecticut, who is a purple-haired old crone who has had a history of bipartisan accomplishments, but as of late has acted out in a seemingly Trump-deranged way. I mean, lashing out at all Republicans. When she went up against Lee Zeldin, she didn't even know what the law was. So he rightfully slam dunk her ass, and I can't get rid of her. I don't know what the fuck is wrong with Connecticut, but I mean, we had Republicans in charge of the state. I don't want to digress here. Anyway, Maine voters can decide whether they're going to elect Plattner, but he's set to run against Republican Susan Collins, a demonstrably centrist lawmaker who is, at least by every indication, a relatively decent person. She certainly is not the type to take off her clothes at a family member's wedding and call it a gift. To trade Collins out for Plattner just strikes me as a poor choice, given what we know about him. Indeed. If he wins the primary. I don't understand the choice. They were looking for somebody that was more masculine, I guess. He comes off as a brash asshole. We don't need more brash assholes in in Congress. Certainly. Does he make poor choices? I could give a shit about the Nazi tattoo. People call it a Nazi tattoo. It's a Totenkopf, which has been part of actually Prussian military way before the Nazis ever existed. So that is what it is. And it's a tattoo. To me, it's free speech if you want to put something on your body. The fact that he didn't know what it was, the death's head. You know, if you're a soldier and you're putting on a death's head, you know, you have the Punisher skull for the Navy SEALs, so on and so forth. You know, I get all that. You're a killer. I get you. But what worries me even more is, especially the platform Kick and texting, sexting other women after you're recently married. It's like if you've been married 10 or 20 years, you know, and your wife has become frigid or whatever, okay, maybe. But the guy's recently married, and to be on a thing like Kick, exposing yourself to who could very well be, and there have been reports that are underage girls, he was sexting. So that thing is more indicative of his character than anything else. All right, moving on. Politico, I wanted to address this. This is story number 15. Judge launches an inquiry into Trump IRS settlement that led to anti-weaponization fund. Now it goes on to say that U.S. District Judge Kathleen Williams asked Trump's lawyers to respond to a call to explore the deal that led to the settlement. Okay. Is it a conflict of interest? Trump's administration and his attorney general is settling a case with Trump for over $1 billion. He's suing for $1 billion. But let's get to the point here. The anti-weaponization fund was a gift to the American people, particularly conservatives that have been targeted by the left and the left's lawfare, which I commend. But the point is, Trump won the settlement. Why did he win the settlement? Earlier this year, Trump filed a $10 billion lawsuit against the IRS before he was in office over the leak of his tax returns by a private contractor in 2019 and 2020. There were two incidents of this private contractor hired by the IRS that leaked classified documents. Your tax returns that are filed with the IRS are classified, were leaked to the media to no avail. I think, who was it? Rachel Maddow was waving his tax return around. There's nothing in it. But leaked it to the media in a gross dereliction of duty by this private contractor. So the IRS is, in fact, liable. You know, it was a concerted conspiracy effort. You know, it wasn't just one rogue guy working for this company. The Democrats work as a conspiracy continually, if you didn't know that. Socialism is a grand conspiracy. Oh, so crazy. Crazy idea you got there. But it is. So it didn't go to trial. There was a settlement, which, of course, I agree is suspicious and fraught with inside dealing, right? So whatever, he should refile, take it to court. He'll win because the evidence is there, whether he wins $10 billion or not. Whatever he wins, then he can keep. But he decided to put it back into the government. So this $1.8 billion he was awarded in a settlement is going to go back into the Treasury coffers. Well, then that's not an award to Trump for the misdeed of the IRS. So he should refile, or he should get to keep the $1.8 billion. But I don't agree a settlement made with his attorney general. I think it should go to court, and that's fine. But I think he should just keep whatever, because it was done against him. Before the lawsuit advanced, Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche revealed that the settlement had been reached. Instead of a payout to Trump, the settlement would result in the establishment of a $1.8 billion fund to make payouts to people described in the settlement as victims of the government weaponization. So let's be clear here that it is taxpayer money, but it was awarded to Trump. But the reason there was a settlement was because Trump said, I don't want to keep the money, but I want to take that money and set it up for people that have been wronged by the government, which includes himself and his family. So people don't really understand the case, right? That Trump has been persecuted with lawfare again and again and again and again. And when he sues, he wins because he was right. Zero Hedge story number 16. ADP reports U.S. economy added the most jobs in 16 months in May. ADP says 122,000 jobs were added in May, better than the 120 expected and the biggest monthly addition since January 2025. So the biggest of his career. And you could see, this is jobs added. This is not total jobs, right? So you could see that right after COVID, jobs skyrocketed. So there was a rehiring. And then there was a little dip. There was a little spike. And then those job hirings fell off. And then there was a spike in 2023. That was after the passage of the ill-fated bill. The Green New Deal, which was said the Inflation Reduction Act. So there was a lot of money pumped into the economy. And then it fell, rose a little bit, fell again before the election of Donald Trump. And you could see this is Biden's era here before Trump took office. And then when Trump took office, they've been mild gains. Still weighed down by Biden's inflation. Biden ruined the U.S. economy. Ruined it. Borrowing $6 trillion. He didn't need $6 trillion, but they did it anyway. And don't forget who prosecuted COVID. If you're still thinking it was a zoonotic transmission, you're out of your mind. Going to move on to the next story. Post-millennial. Zohran Mamdani. Article number 17. Mamdani pushes debunked claim of 7 anti-trans murders on X for Pride Month. Daily Wire investigation reveals only 6 cases cited. None ruled as anti-trans hate crimes by law enforcement. Now, if you know anything about this, there's a myth that was perpetuated by Democrats, socialists, progressives, that trans people were under attack. Now, most of the murders of trans people were committed against trans prostitutes who were passing themselves off as women and that were murdered by Johns who realized they're men. That's in most cases. In other instances, trans people marginalize themselves. A lot of times are living in I don't want to say marginal, like sketchy street situations. And anybody in those situations are more prone to violence. There's no mainstream trans people that hold down jobs and, own houses or well situated who, end up murdered. And like the police said, whether or not it's considered a hate crime or just a crime. You have to prove that this person was murdered because they were trans. The claim was debunked by the Daily Wire journalist Brecca Stoll, who found that only 6 cases were actually cited and law enforcement did not classify any of the 6 as anti-trans hate crimes. But they perpetuate this myth continually. Story number 18, Fox News. Gallup poll finds American support for LGBTQ plus issues sliding backward amid cultural shift. Support for legal same-sex marriage drops to 65%, down 6 points from its 2022-2023 peak. I blame this on A, the trans issue, B, sexualizing children when people find out the true nature of the books that are banned, which is like cartoon books of Johnny, blows his neighbor while cutting his lawn or something like that. Lawn Boy. I think that was Lawn Boy. And these are designed for children. So there's that. Also, it's the gay mafia and being browbeat, because originally it was like, oh, we're just peaceful people. We want to love who we want to love and marry who we want to marry. La, 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 la. Great. But then it became bullying. Like, if you don't support us and whatever we want to do, you're transphobic. And then there are the cases that came out where gay couples were adopting children and then pimping out their children to pedophiles. Because perverse sexual desire a lot of times leads to other perverse sexual desire and kind of this increase in more and more perversion. And I have nothing against people that are gay or whatever you want to call yourself, queer or bi or lesbian or even trans or, whatever. You're free to do what you want. The problem is when you involve innocent children or when you try to bully me like the left and progressives do, that I have to believe what you believe. And I don't. I'm not saying that I have to challenge your belief system with raw facts and all these other things. If you want to debate, I certainly can do that, but I just assume people live their lives. Whatever you want to do, everybody, is trying to make their own way. Go for it as an adult. But this overarching thing, like I have to accept it, and it was first tolerate it, okay, then accept it, okay, but then I have to promote it. And that's just what I will not do. I'm not going to be forced to promote things I don't believe. And you're free to believe what you want to believe, but don't. It's this whole, if you ever saw Seinfeld, that one episode with Kramer, who's not wearing the ribbon? So Kramer gets beat up by a couple gay dudes because he wasn't wearing the AIDS ribbon. Federalist story number 19, after decades of anti-America indoctrination, don't expect a big 250th celebration because friggin' Velshi, Ali Velshi, America's quincentennial is being treated as an opportunity for self-criticism rather than celebration. MS Now's Ali Velshi said Sunday he feels a deep unease about celebrating America's 250th birthday because America has never actually fully reckoned with its racist past and its original founding sin of slavery. America didn't found slavery, you asshole. Right? Britain still had slavery when America was founded. So your take on history is completely wrong. And I imagine Ali Velshi, or you're Hindi or Muslim or whatever, for you to come in here and say America is this or it's that or hasn't a deep unease celebrating. America is great. You want to know why America is great? Because it has a constitution that enshrines individual freedoms, liberties. So liberty is political freedom. And without political freedoms, you can't have physical freedom. And they gave up physical slavery a long time ago for a financial indentured servitude, that type of slavery. And nobody really makes it click, because it was incompatible with the new monetary system of debt, the debt system. So chattel slavery didn't work in that. They said, well, you free everybody and then pay them a shit amount to toil in the field, and they'll have to pay it all back in housing, food, and clothing costs. Just the news, there's some good news here. Just the news, red states spark trend in abolishing property taxes amid state budget surpluses. So if the state has a lot of money, then it can allocate money to the municipalities, which generally collect property taxes. As home values skyrocket, taxpayers grow increasingly frustrated with dinner table issues such as confidence in a secure financial future and anxiety over affordability. Republican-led states enjoy budget surpluses as a new trend of eliminating property taxes is emerging in red states. On Tuesday, the Florida state legislature approved a November ballot measure that would abolish property taxes for most primary homeowners across the Sunshine State. So you will still have to pay property tax on additional properties, investment properties, etc. But it's not happening in blue states. And in my municipality, they just hiked the property taxes, which is really going to force us to move because it's not fair. It's not tenable. Because why? Because they want to put in speeding cameras. The vote came after Florida Governor Ron DeSantis called the state legislature to a special session, citing rapidly rising property values, local tax collection surging from $32 billion in 2019 to a projected $60 billion currently and $83 billion by 2032, and inflation burdens on residents. Several states are already moving towards major property tax relief for primary homeowners, mirroring Florida's push to raise the homestead exemption to $250,000 and eventually eliminate non-school taxes on homesteaded homes. Great. My state legislator passed the Homestead Act, but failed to pass the Senate revision, which said that homeowners could just file for homestead on their primary residence for tax relief. They took that away, and now the city council has to vote to allow you or primary resident owners to make the homestead tax exemption. So we said to the city council, vote it in. And they're like, maybe next year. Because once you're in government, you're like, we have all these expenditures. We got to fund it by, there's only one source of revenue, really. The Federalist, story number 21, a minor IRS inconvenience shows Trump is serious about fighting fraud. I'm not going to get into this whole article. But the fact is, the author here received a notice in the mail about whether or not he filed his IRS for a refund. So he had to clear it up by calling the IRS. But the Government Accountability Office recently noted that the federal government made at least $186 billion in improper payments in the fiscal year that ended last September 30th. And that's payouts to the Treasury payouts for refunds. And several IRS-administered programs, including the Earned Income Tax Credit and Obamacare exchange subsidies, feature improper payment rates in excess of 30%, not to mention the fraud concerns associated with Obamacare subsidies that the GAO documented in depth in a report last December. So the IRS is trying to claw back some of these fraudulent payments. So it's reaching out to filers and saying, did you file for a return? Someone might have filed in your name for a return, blah, blah, blah. So you might be called or notified to clear up some discrepancies. But that's just the IRS trying to fight fraud, which in that article, the author, Christopher Jacobs, outlines that it's a good thing, even though it might give you a hassle of spending an hour on the phone trying to clear it up. Fox News story number 22, DOJ expands indictment against SPLC alleging $4 million in secretly funneled to KKK and extremist groups. Prosecutors allege the nonprofit opened bank accounts tied to fictitious entities to conceal the payments. The same thing the Bidens were doing in their crime family escapades. They're called pass-throughs. We talked about it yesterday. Was it yesterday with Lee Zeldin? Talking about how the EPA and the whole, again, the Obama administration taxing, borrowing way too much money, almost 70 billion and 8 billion went to this and to that. And these little sketchy groups that got billions of dollars in some cases, and in other cases, hundreds of millions of dollars that had no proof of actually doing any of the work that they were awarded these grants for. But it's the same thing. You create a company, you put a Leering Center on the door, and then you just accept the grants. Where the money goes after that is never enforced. And so what the DOJ says the SPLC was doing is they were laundering the money and then taking that money and creating white supremacy and other extremism. And I imagine we said long ago that the ADL was just the Jewish counterpart of the SPLC. They mirrored each other. So I imagine the ADL is doing very similar things. They're probably hiding it a little better because they know a thing or two about banking. Also some disturbing news. We were talking about the Montana SPL4, SPL, the safety lab there in Montana. Just the news, a DOJ charges foreign nationals working at NIH with smuggling monkeypox into the U.S. and lying about it. The department accused 53-year-old Vincent Munster, a citizen of the Netherlands, and 38-year-old Claude Quay, a citizen of Cameroon, of allegedly lying to Customs and Border Protection officials at the airport in Detroit about the contents of a large plastic case they carried with them from a trip to the Republic of Congo in January, where an outbreak of monkeypox was occurring. The two men who worked at NIH's Rocky Mountain Laboratory in Montana claimed the case contained diagnostic and testing equipment, but subsequent investigation by CBP and the FBI revealed it contained 113 vials in styrofoam coolers. The FBI tested 20 of the vials so far, and 17 have contained deactivated monkeypox virus. It's attenuated. So it's not a live virus, it's killed. Still, you work for the NIH, you know what the protocols are, and you're lying about smuggling in not live virus, attenuated virus. Still, why would you lie? So in that lab in Montana, the BSL, Biosafety Lab 4, BSL 4 lab, why would you lie about they've had so many troubles there. That was the place where a monkey infected with Ebola, a bit of technician, and that it wasn't reported was the big thing. More scary science news. One American News, Google parent company seeks EPA permit to release 32 million lab-bred mosquitoes in California and Florida. How nice. Biological initiative linked to Alphabet, Google's parent company, has prompted public debate after Verily, its life sciences subsidiary, filed a request with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency for an experimental use permit. If approved, the 2-year project would involve the phased release of up to 32 million lab-bred male mosquitoes across California and Florida, specifically up to 16 million per state, with a release plan in Florida in the first year. And the California and the second. Alphabet Incorporated is a publicly traded company that is primarily owned by large institutional investors such as Vanguard and BlackRock. Fucking bankers, who knows? I mean, Bill Gates already did something like this. This is scary. I don't want lab-bred, genetically modified mosquitoes released. For whatever you say the intent is, I don't believe you. You know why? Because of COVID. Do not believe you. Don't believe no liars. The Guardian, like a Klingon prison inside Barack Obama's audacious, nearly windowless, $850 million presidential library. So almost $1 billion. Towering over low-income area of Chicago and wrapped in a speech that's hard to decipher. This controversial monolith feels like a menacing sci-fi HQ. It is a monument or a mausoleum. And they show it here. It is a brutalist edifice that should never have been built. It is disgusting, and it harkens back to what you would consider the Baal worshiping era. See, what they would do in, I say anciency, but antiquity, they would build edifices. And if you know anything about symbology, the standing edifice, pillar, obelisk is a monument to man's existence, and the worship of man, which against, of course, is against God. So, I mean, that's the whole point. It's, it's mine's not working now. But in any case, it's a modern obelisk, right? So it is occultism. And so that's basically what it represents. It's neo-brutalism. It never should have been built. It never should have been approved. But again, you're in a supermajority city of Chicago, so whatever the lead Democrat wants, they get. I almost came across the word can't function. I should have more coffee. We're going to move on to another breaking news story here. Story number 26, New York Post. 60-Minute star Scott Pelley fired from CBS News after blasting Barry Weiss in heated showdown. Doesn't have any text here. What I am going to chime in is the breaking news story. So Scott Pelley, this is just reported in the New York Post. Scott Pelley accused CBS News management under editor-in-chief Barry Weiss of trying to inject falsehoods and bias. Isn't that the pot calling the kettle black? Into reporting that the veteran correspondent was fired Tuesday, Pelley, who spent 37 years at CBS News and became one of the most recognizable faces of 60 Minutes, leveled a series of extraordinary allegations against CBS News leadership. For my part, news management has instructed me to inject falsehoods and bias into politically sensitive stories. I have been told to include assertions that are unverified, blah, blah, blah. To date, in every case, I've managed to ignore these instructions or refuse them. That's why I got fired. It's called insubordination. What Barry Weiss has told 60 Minutes to do, not just Scott Pelley, but everyone, is that if you have a politically charged story targeting, slandering the Trump administration, you have to give them the right to respond. And you have to air their response. So he's saying that because in objective journalism, you have to present the other side if you're targeting them with an attack, or you're putting out a piece that shows them in a poor light and blames them for whatever catastrophe you're reporting on, you have to give them the opportunity to respond and then publish in your piece the response. He calls it first of all, he calls it bias. Then that's not bias. What Barry was trying to do is the piece was bias, and she's supposed to make it she's trying to make it more objective. And then he says unverified. So she's just saying that just air their response. And unverified, then why don't you try to verify? Like, you'll air their response, and then you go after an initial investigation into the White House's claim, we found that they were incorrect about blah, blah, blah. You could do that. But he's saying that it wasn't verified. Well, if you choose not to verify something, yes, it's unverified. And the bias is strictly on the people producing the pieces at 60 Minutes, as we all know. That if CBS is left alone, that they will produce these propaganda pieces, especially the ones that involve the CBS Sunday Morning reporter Rob Costa, who's a CIA asset, producing pieces that are, damage the president. And it's fine. You could do pointed pieces that attack public officials. Of course you can. Of course. But you have to give them the opportunity to respond, especially if it's the president of the United States or the administration. You just can't go, the administration is sending American citizens to Seacot prison in El Salvador. Maybe one, I think it was mistakenly. Whatever. I know, I worked in journalism for 30 years. I know what objectivity is. I've been reading hard journalism since I was 12. I know what it is. I know you can come, as a reporter, you can come to conclusions on your own. Or if you're smart, like I have always been, is that you look at both sides of the story and you try to, your object is to find the truth, not to push a political bias. Don't tell me that, leftism, progressivism is the way, and they've never made any mistakes. Speaking of which, Federalist article number 27, Henry Nowak's murder is the logical conclusion of Black Lives Matter. If you didn't know anything about this story, is Henry Nowak was a white kid in London who was stabbed to death by a Sikh carrying a 8-inch ceremonial blade, which they're allowed to carry and no one else is allowed to carry 8-inch blades in London, and then was stabbed with it. And then he died by the hands of police because of their negligence. We're going to get into the story. In any case, racial hierarchy is embedded in the logic of Black Lives Matter, what it looks like in practice in the murder of Henry Nowak. This is by John Daniel Davidson, and he's equating Black Lives Matter to what is happening, its logical conclusion, in Britain. Public outrage in Britain is rising after the release of harrowing police body cam footage in the stabbing and subsequent arrest of Henry Nowak, an 18-year-old university student who was killed December 3rd, 2025 in Southampton, England, by a 23-year-old Sikh man named Vikram Digwa. If Nowak had not been white, and if his killer had not been Indian, as it is, the murder of Henry Nowak will probably not trigger the kind of rioting that George Floyd's death did in the United States, but it does perfectly illustrate the logic of Black Lives Matter. Racial minorities are to be believed and preferred. White people are not, even in the cases where whites are the victims of violent crimes. What happened? Digwa stabbed Nowak 5 times with an 8-inch Sikh ceremonial blade, which is illegal for anyone but Sikhs to carry in Britain, including a fatal stab to the chest. As Nowak was walking home from a night out with his English football team, instead of calling an ambulance, Digwa called the police while his mother helped him hide the murder weapon. When the police arrived at the scene, he lied, telling them Nowak had called him a racist slur, which is a crime in Britain, owing to that country's lack of anything like a First Amendment. So the police arrested Nowak, not Digwa, even as Nowak pleaded for medical aid, saying he had been stabbed. He told the officers he couldn't breathe, just like George Floyd. He said this 9 times, and 4 times he told them he had been stabbed. The police didn't believe him. On the video footage, the officer replies, "You've been stabbed, mate? I don't think you have." Police then handcuffed Nowak and dragged him across a gravel driveway, reading him his rights as he bled out. 3 minutes later, Nowak lost consciousness. He died not long after at the scene. And you can see it in the footage. He was turning white. anemic, obviously, because he was bleeding. And then he died without them rendering him medical attention, medical aid. It's fucked up. I mean, the natural progression of what we even had, the progressivism in the United States, would have led us to what Britain is now. And now everybody in Europe is realizing what had happened to them because they didn't believe the conspiracy theory about replacement migration, which is in the UN. But the problem is the replacement migration was full of a group that is intent on conquering. I don't want to go on to what the Turks said when the Turks first came. When I visited my grandmother in France, the Turks were everywhere, and they weren't very nice to the native population, as was well known. And so even on that example, what did they do? They imported more Muslims, and not that I have anything against Muslims, but they're not known for their assimilation. And in this case, it's not a Muslim, it's a Sikh from India, whatever. Having these populations come in keeps labor costs low, but also bleeds out the social safety net, blah, blah, blah. And what they're doing is divide and conquer, causing strife by importing populations that they know won't assimilate, that they know will cause resentment among the native population, and that they will just go, oh, why are you a hater and a racist? Because you're bleeding the government of social services and you're taking jobs and you're not assimilating, because the resentment is on both sides. You know, the incoming population is resentment against the native population and vice versa. And that happens to do with like disparate cultures also. To some extent, Hispanic versus white, but not as much certainly as Muslim versus white, or African versus white. The American thinker, I think, is the last story here. In Colombia, the tiger roars, no more socialism. For the U.S., this is particularly good news. After polls and media accounts have indicated that the FARC-linked, if you don't know what FARC is, look it up. The FARC-linked leftist Ivan Cepeda could win the first round of the election. Voters went and handed the tough-talking conservative the victory. That was a stinging rebuke to Colombia's ruling leftist party and its odious president, Gustavo Petro, with voters giving them the boot and replacing them with a firmly pro-Trump, pro-private sector, anti-crime conservative who, worse for them, seems to be on a mission to end the scourge of leftism forever. Alvarado de la Espriella, known as El Tigre, won the first round of the presidential election on Sunday by a decisive 44% over his far-left rival, Ivan Cepeda, who drew a mere 40%. But again, it's a ranked choice voting thing where they're going to have to go to a runoff, I believe. But it's good news. Thanks for joining me today. Don't forget to engage the channel, like, subscribe, leave a comment, share the podcast. How do we do? Hour and 8 minutes. Thanks for joining me today. Stay tuned for a possible episode of Tuesdays with Perry tonight. We go live 9:15. I'll see you tomorrow. Respect.
The new world order.
You can't handle the truth.
American, I have rights.